Chapter 1. The stirring of the throne room of the Master of Mankind, has never known silence. Even in its most hushed hours, there is always the constant drone of machinery, the hiss of failing conduits, the groan of ancient servitors shuffling along their endless circuits, maintaining what should have long ago collapsed. The golden throne is not a seat, but a continent of iron and gold, a mountain of cables and arteries pulsing with the faint light of power siphoned from reactors that themselves devour whole hives of Terra's populace. It is a god machine that bleeds and sighs, and at its heart the Emperor has sat immobile for 10,000 years. Yet on this imagined day the rhythm falters. Something subtle at first, so slight it could be mistaken for a fluctuation in the power grid. But those attuned to him, the psychers feeding their souls into the Astronomican's fire, know instantly that this is no malfunction. Something stirs. The first to feel it are the Custodes. They stand in their eternal vigil, golden statues before the throne, weapons cradled with inhuman precision, eyes never wavering. For centuries they have listened to the faint whisper of his will, an unspoken presence that binds them to their duty. And in a single heartbeat that whisper changes. It sharpens, becomes not the static hum of a god kept alive by machinery, but something with cadence, something like breath. For the first time in millennia, their perfect discipline flickers. A tremor in the gaunted grip of a guardian spear. The barest quiver of disbelief passing through the perfect faces carved by genecraft and oath. They say nothing, Custodes do not chatter, but in the marrow of their being. They know the galaxy has tilted dot outside the sanctum. The shift spreads like a tremor through the soil of Terra. Pilgrims prostrate in the dust beyond the eternity gate feel it in their bones, though they cannot name it. Some collapse into tears, others shriek in ecstasy, believing they have been granted visions. The Adeptus Ministorum, fat with ritual and liturgy, immediately cloak the anomaly in prayer, declaring it a miracle without yet knowing what it is. In the depths of the administrative hives, adepts scribble furiously as data slates flare with sudden psychic static. The vox channels of the Inquisition burst alive with terse, encrypted orders, each cell demanding confirmation of what they already fear. The Astronomican itself flares, its psychic beacon surging with an intensity not felt since the Great Crusade. Navigators across the galaxy cry out as their third eyes blaze with unbearable light, charting courses through the warp, as if guided by an unseen hand more forceful than any they have known. But what is most terrifying is not what they see, but what they cannot. The stir within the throne does not arrive like a voice proclaiming command, but as a shift in gravity itself. The Emperor, silent for so long, moved not in flesh, not yet but in presence. Those with psychic sensitivity collapse under its weight, screaming visions of fire and judgment. They see the Astronomican not as a star, but as a storm, a vortex consuming the Imperium itself. Some muttered prophecies long buried, whispers of an emperor who would one day rise, not to save, but to judge his creation. Rumors that the Ecclesiarchy has long suppressed now spread like disease, that perhaps the golden triptych, the golden throne was never meant to be eternal, that perhaps even gods awaken. Within the Sanctum Imperialis, the High Lords convene in a panic that threatens to unmake centuries of rigid hierarchy in an instant. They demand reports from the Mechanicus Magi who service the throne's decaying infrastructure. Red-robed priests stammer through their vox grills, unable to explain readings that defy reason, power surges not drawn from Terra's reactors, but emanating outward, as if the throne itself were generating energy. Servitors burn out in droves, their flesh-charred husks collapsing amid showers of sparks. Some declare it a malfunction. Others dare whisper the word blasphemy. But deep within their dative vaults, the Mechanicus Magi recall prophecies too, fragments of lore suggesting that the throne was always more than a life support system, that it was perhaps a gate, a bridge, a prison, and through it all the Custodes remain silent, unmoving, though their hearts thunder with the unbearable truth. They, more than any, know the cost of this possibility. For if the Emperor is rising, then every oath they have sworn, every sacrifice made by 10,000 years of human blood, is cast into a new and terrible light. The Imperium has built itself on the corpse of its Emperor, the image of a silent god who neither speaks nor judges. If he should awaken, the edifice of worship, power, and fear that sustains the Imperium may crumble into ash. And yet, beneath their fear, there is something else, something they have buried for longer than any mortal lifespan. Hope. Fragile as glass, that their Emperor might return not as a corpse on a machine, but as a being of will and voice once more. The throne stirs again, louder this time. Cables snap like tendons. Sparks scatter across the marble floor, hissing as they strike the banners of crimson and gold. The Emperor does not speak, not yet, but all who kneel in the palace, all who whisper his name across the stars, feel a single, inexorable truth. The long silence has ended. The palace absorbs panic the way old stone absorbs heat, slowly and without relief, and within that searing stillness I am assigned to listen. My designation on the rota is Scribe Adept Malak Kir, 3rd class, oath-bound to the Archivum Vox beneath the Hall of Leng. I have lived my life in the hush between transmissions, cataloging the prayers that ride the ether and the screams that sometimes follow them, tagging each with time stamps and purity seals, sending them down into the bellies of data engines that outlive dynasties. When the first tremor passes through the throne, we do not see light or hear sound. Our instruments simply begin to behave as if terrified. Needles tremble at their pens. Sanctified ink beads like sweat. A prayer wheel in the corner, untouched for decades, starts to spin counter to its blessing. The senior adept makes the sign of the imperial aquila with a hand that will not stop shaking. I try to annotate a null spike and realize my quill has driven itself through the vellum and into the wood of the bench beneath, as if the parchment were suddenly paper-thin and the world beneath it closer than it should be. The Vox floods. Astropathic choirs from orbit report harmonics outside the lexicon of safe keys. The Astronomican's cadence shifts. Not brighter merely, but purposeful, as though the beacon has stopped screaming and started speaking. We route the surge to the inquisitorial feeds and the Mechanicus archives. We stamp every packet with priority glyphs until the stamping itself becomes meaningless. It is not a new message, it is gravity. Even those among us with no witch sight feel it as a pressure behind the eyes, a dull ache of attention, not our own. I look up and see other adepts looking up at nothing, mouths parted like drowners breaking a surface. Between bursts, I catch the tail end of a transmission from the Schola Progenium over the petitioner's steps. The children orphans turned into order have ceased their catechisms mid-verse. A custodian, unnamed and therefore terrifying, requested silence. The custodian never requests. He commands by existing. And still he asked, softly, for quiet. The second surge hits with the sound of distant thunder moving through metal bones. Conduits along the spine of the sanctum exhale light. In the archivum, the reliquary door unlatches itself as if remembering a better age. We all feel it taste like warm copper. I think irreverently, and with instant shame, of blood oranges in an agri-dome vid I watched as a child. It passes. What remains is the smell of promethium and old incense, and the sudden awareness that the throne's sorrowing. Machinery is not alone in breathing. Rumor moves faster than light in the palace because it does not travel. It blooms. The Ministorum claims a miracle, of course. The Mechanicus claims a malfunction, of course. The Inquisition claims jurisdiction over truth. The High Lords request minutes, vote tallies, precedents. The Custodes do not claim. They position. In corridors that never admit the word fear, people begin to walk with the brittle carefulness of those carrying a sleeping infant. Through a house of mirrors, I am sent with a small procession to deliver transcripts to a Mechanicus, delegation stationed at the gate of wards. We travel through galleries of statues, saints with eyes of black, stone and primarchs rendered in impossible scale, their shadows like ships. A vox-hailer somewhere above us mutters litanies in Binharik, the syllables clipping like insect legs. There is a moment where all the lumen strips along the ceiling flicker in sync, a staccato heartbeat. The woman beside me, Archivist Sarai Vale, stops and presses her palm to the marble pillar to steady herself. "Do you feel it?" She asks, the question thin with awe. I nod even though words feel expensive. We move on. At the gate, the red-robed magi await like cliff faces. Their augmetics tick and re-aim with predatory grace, but their voices, when they speak, modulate with something near humility. They take our data slates with mechadendrites, slick with sacred oils, and request, with exquisite politeness, any unfiltered impressions we might have recorded. I realize that a priest of the Omnissiah is asking a third-class scribe for adjectives. I give them: heavier, closer, awake. The nearest magos inclines a skull-faced helm, as if committing the words to a liturgy. Behind them, servitors slump in their carriages, drooling thin smoke. A tech priest touches one with a tenderness that seems at odds with steel. They burn in prayer, he murmurs through his vox grill, and I cannot tell if he means the servitors or us. On our return, the procession is halted by a wall of gold. Custodians in silent file cross the transept, their presence bending the path of every mortal like mass bends space. One turns his helm fractionally toward us, and I feel like a moth noticing the moon. Through the gap they leave, I see the far doors of the Sanctum Imperialis, and beyond them the merest sliver of light, raw and clean as a forge, just before ignition. I have seen Terra's dawns through smog veils and shrine smoke. This is not that. This light has weight. It casts no shadow that I can detect, but everything seems more true in it, even the dust motes. which hang as if considering their own names. We resume walking. The palace breathes. The palace remembers. Rumors accumulate into theories, and theories harden into heresies, and heresies begin to look like maps of the future. A junior ecclesiarch we pass is weeping and laughing in the same breath, reciting a psalm that has not been heard outside vault archives since. M31, a grizzled officer of the Astra Militarum, stands rigid before a mural of the great Crusade and repeats his oath as if the words might be keys. Somewhere a Spitarius cohort clatters by, their march as precise as a metronome hammered into iron. Their optics glow brighter than before, or perhaps that is my imagination birthing omens back in the Archivum Vox. We find a new message waiting in the buffer, not addressed to the High Lords, not to the Inquisition, not even to the Mechanicus. It is a low-band astropathic echo, unclaimed by any cipher, a spillover caught in our net like a fish no one meant to keep. We isolate it, clean the grit of warp hiss, parse the harmonics, and what emerges is not language in the way we know it. It is cadence. It is breath-given geometry. Sarai listens first because Sarai always listens first, and her eyes fill with the kind of tears that do not fall. She nods to me, and I put the audio to my ear. It is not a voice. It is the shape of a room you remember from childhood, felt with your eyes closed, counted in steps and turns. It is the memory of standing at attention, every bone aware of posture, while a presence larger than weather weighs your worth and finds you not yet wanting. I do not hear words, but I know them when they arrive, like a tide you cannot see moving everything on the shore. The cadence resolves into a single intention that is not command and not question, but something between those poles, a bridge that invites and demands in equal measure. Stand, I straighten without choosing to. Around me, adepts rise from benches and stools and prayer cushions. No one speaks. Benches creak. Quills rattle in jars. Even the reliquary door seems to brace itself. The pressure behind the eyes eases, not absent but arranged, like a weight shifted to a place where the floor is strongest. For a breath that feels like an age, there is balance. For a heartbeat longer, there is the sense, only the sense, that the balance is about to tip. A tremor shudders through the palace so gently that nothing falls, and so completely that I feel it in the small scars on my knuckles. Far above and far within, a mechanism the size of continents adjusts by a width no wider than a sigh. Somewhere custodians exchange a glance that will never be written down. Somewhere a High Lord stops speaking and does not remember to begin again. Somewhere a child on the steps laughs and does not know why. In the Archivum we stand with our backs straight and our lungs unaccountably full. And in the distant furnace of the sanctum, the golden throne breathes. The light at the far doors brightens by a fraction no instrument would dignify, and still I see it. The pressure changes. The cadence gathers itself like a hand about to knock. Once upon a door that has never been opened, the cadence does not recede this time. It lingers, pressing into marrow, shaping thought, like a sculptor's hand against wet clay. My fellow adepts mutter scraps of catechism, though none can keep the rhythm. Their words break against the pressure, drowning in the vast silence that follows. We have known the Emperor as absence, as symbol, as the still point upon which the galaxy spins. Now the absence breathes, The Vox lines splinter with contradictory reports. Some navigators scream that the Astronomican has become unbearable, that the star has swollen into a sun too close to their lids. Others claim clarity routes through the warp opening like boulevards through smog, every current suddenly obedient to a will vaster than the sea. Both cannot be true, yet both flood the channels, and the Inquisition burns Vox traffic by the ream, marking each heresy with equal suspicion. I return to my bench, but I cannot sit. My knees lock as if standing is no longer choice but condition. The chamber hums, and with it the air taste of ozone, dry and sharp, cutting the back of my throat. The reliquary door creaks wider on its hinges, though no hand touches it, and the relic within an old crusade banner, faded to the color of bone stirs, as though caught in a draught. Sarai whispers a child's prayer, not to the god emperor, not to the throne, but to the father she lost to hive collapse decades ago. The words tremble in her throat like fragile glass dot, and then the palace answers. Not in voice, not in words, but in motion. The floor shifts, stone on stone, as though a tectonic plate has realigned beneath the mountain of the sanctum. Dust falls from the carved ceiling of the archivum, settling like stars on our ink-stained robes. The light at the great doors swells another fraction. This time I smell something impossible, iron and smoke and sanctified oils, the scent of the great crusade preserved in memory and myth. Know then what every soul across Terra begins to know in the same instant. The throne is no longer a tomb. The Emperor has moved. The Emperor's moving dot above us. Bells begin to toll. First one, then another, until the whole palace shakes with the roar of 1,000 iron throats. It is not celebration. It is alarm. It is warning. It is the sound that wakes a city to fire. And somewhere, beyond the throne, beyond Terra, beyond the Imperium, something ancient and watching stirs in reply. The bells do not fall silent. They echo across Terra like the heartbeat of a colossus, each toll rolling down the mountainside of the imperial palace, through the hives across oceans turned to chemical sludge, into the bones of pilgrims sprawled in prayer. The sound is not uniform. Some hear triumph, others hear dread. I hear judgment. From the archivum balcony I glimpse the steps, black with bodies pressed so tightly together they seem to be a single organism, a tide of humanity staring toward the eternity gate. Some fall to their knees, foreheads cracking against stone, blood mixing with tears. Others raise their arms and howl as if the very sky were ripping open to reveal salvation. Yet still more back away in terror, clutching children, muttering against blasphemy, cursing what they once adored. 10,000 years of certainty, fractures in a single hour. Inside, the High Lords are dragged into emergency convocation. Couriers run breathless down corridors. Parchment and data slates clutch to their chests like shields. Box grills shout orders, contradicted a heartbeat later by new ones. I overhear one, seal the Astra Militarum barracks. No unauthorized movement. Another, recall the Grey Knights to Titan now. Every order taste of panic disguised as protocol. The custodians remain statues of gold. They neither affirm nor deny, their silence more terrible than shouting. I watch them as one lifts his spear, not in readiness but in recognition, as though saluting an unseen figure approaching from behind the throne. That small gesture carries more weight than any decree of the Senatorum Imperialis. My knees nearly buckle beneath it. And then the Astronomican erupts. Across the galaxy, ships in the warp reel as if struck by the fists of gods. Geller fields stutter, demons wail and scatter, and navigators see routes not merely clearer but carved like avenues of fire. Some are blinded, their third eyes burned to ash. Others collapse sobbing, claiming they have seen Terra itself shining brighter than any star. Fleets locked in battle suddenly find themselves flung across sectors, enemies torn apart by the sudden violence of the Imperium realigned. The warp is not calmer. It is not safer. It is awake. In the palace, astropaths convulse on their couches, froth bubbling at their lips as they choke on visions. The strongest scream of an approaching figure wrought in golden flame, striding not through reality but through meaning itself, their words stolen from their mouths before they can shape them. We record what fragments we can, though each scribe's script dissolves into illegibility before the ink dries. The light at the throne grows again. No longer is it a sliver. It is a flood. 1,000 marble reliefs ignite, aquilas gleam like suns, shadows are banished entirely. My eyes water, yet I cannot close them. No one can. The light is not upon us, it is within us, filling cavities we never knew were hollow. The Mechanicus priests near the sanctum cry out, half in ecstasy, half in despair, for they know what none will admit aloud. The throne is repairing itself. Cables once corroded fuse whole. Circuits glow with power never provided. Machines designed only to restrain now expand as though preparing to release. For all their millennia of service, the Magi understand now they were only jailers. And in that moment a voice brushes against my mind. Not sound, not even thought as I know it, but intention pressed against the raw clay of the soul. It says nothing more than a breath, nothing more than a promise. And yet I know, with the certainty of bone, what it means. The Emperor is no longer still. The Emperor is rising. The light becomes unbearable. Not merely brightness to the eyes, but radiance that pours into the mind, filling cavities of memory I had long since forgotten. I see my mother's face, not as it was when she died beneath the rubble of a hive spire, but younger, laughing, her hands free of callus. I smell ozone, promethium, and the salt tang of Terra's oceans before industry bled them dry. Every adept in the Archivum cries out, not in pain, but in the terror of too much truth forced into flesh too fragile to bear it. The throne groans like a glacier splitting, metal shrieking as conduits tear themselves loose and reform in new configurations, as if remembering their true design. Sparks cascade in golden arcs. Servitors ignite, collapsing as husks, their flesh finally too spent to carry the burden. Tech priests wail hymns through vox grills that distort and break, their mechadendrites wrapping around one another as though clinging for comfort. Then comes the sound. For 10,000 years, the Emperor has not spoken. Even the whispers custodians sometimes claimed to hear were not words, but impressions. But now something stirs in the air itself, a vibration like a note struck upon the strings of the galaxy. It is not voice in the way we know voice, yet it is sound undeniable, shivering through marrow and steel alike. It is one syllable, vast enough to level cities, soft enough to move tears. The word shakes the palace. Marble statues crack from crown to pedestal. Frescoes flake like burning paper. The pilgrims on the steps wail as one, a billion souls lifting their throats in terror and adoration. The Astra Militarum regiments stationed in orbit report weapons systems locking without command, machine spirits bending as though in reverence. Across the void, navigators steer their ships not by charts or instinct, but by certainty, as though every vessel in the Imperium is suddenly a bead on the Emperor's rosary. The High Lords collapse into chaos. Some declare holy war. Others demand the throne be suppressed before the galaxy fractures. The Inquisitors draw blades and bolt pistols on one another within the convocation chamber, their secret doctrines now revealed in open hostility. The Emperor returns as man. One shrieks. The Emperor rises as God. Another answers, and the chamber drowns in the sound of its own disunity. And still the throne moves. Golden panels peel back like wings. Cables retract like serpents slithering from prey. The colossal form upon the seat shifts, skeletal yet incandescent, a ruin of flesh haloed by a storm of psychic fire. I cannot see his face. No one can. The light forbids it. But I feel his gaze as though it rests directly upon me, upon each of us, individually and utterly. In that gaze there is no comfort, no mercy, no cruelty, only judgment vast and impersonal as the void between stars. Sarai beside me falls to her knees, hands clasped, her lips moving too quickly to catch the words. I do not kneel. I cannot. My legs are locked by something more absolute than fear. I simply stand, spine rigid, as though the earlier command still anchors my bones. Stand. We all stand. Across Terra, across the Imperium, billions rise to their feet in unison, not by choice, not by ritual, but because reality itself is shifted to make it so dot and then silence. The light steadies, no longer growing, no longer breaking us. The machinery of the throne hums not in decay but in harmony, as though every cog has remembered its place in the symphony. The air tastes clean, impossibly clean, as if a window has opened upon a world unspoiled. The Emperor does not speak again, but he does not need to. For the first time in 10 millennia, the galaxy knows he is awake in the warp. Demons howl like wolves caught in the blaze of dawn. In the void, alien empires shudder, sensing the tremor of a presence that does not belong to their time or kind. And on Terra, we wait rigid, breathless, certain that the next motion will change everything that has ever been. The waiting is worse than the light, worse than the sound. A silence spreads across Terra so deep it feels physical, pressing against the ears like the depths of an ocean. Vox lines go dead. Data slates refuse to record. Quills break mid-stroke. Even the endless drone of the palace's ancient ventilation systems falters, leaving only the raw sound of human breath echoing against marble and steel. For the first time in memory, the imperial palace is truly silent. I can feel every hair along my arms rise as if charged with static. The Emperor's form on the throne shifts again, subtle but undeniable. His withered hand twitches, not mechanically, not as a convulsion, but with intent. The sound is microscopic, a gauntlet of bone scraping against the armrest, but in the silence it becomes thunder. Every custodian in the chamber stiffens as if struck. Their golden armor hums faintly, resonating with the psychic field pouring outward from the throne. One kneels not in ritual, but as though his body simply cannot remain upright beneath that gaze. Outside, panic mingles with ecstasy. Pilgrims claw at each other to get closer to the steps, trampling bodies beneath their feet. Ecclesiarchs declare spontaneous crusades, their sermons competing, some claiming the god Emperor has returned to lead them into final war, others damning this stirring as the work of chaos wearing holy skin. Blades are drawn in cathedrals, lasguns discharged in holy precincts. Faith, once united by silence, now fractures in the first breath of sound. Reports flood the archivum despite the dead channels, arriving by means no instrument can trace. A message from Cadia's ruins, its broken pylons glowing as if reignited. A whisper from Mars, the fabricator general himself weeping oil and chanting code prayers of submission. A scream from Ultramar. Gilliman doubled over as though struck in the chest, clutching at the Emperor's psychic presence like a drowning man grasping a rope. Across the stars the Imperium convulses as one organism, uncertain whether it is in rebirth or in death throes. And then, in the depths of the warp, something answers. The air grows cold. Frost creeps across the archivum's marble floor, misting our breaths. Sarai clutches my arm, her nails biting through cloth. The psychic storm that is the Emperor's presence collides with another force, vast, mocking, hateful. A laughter ripples through the warp, too immense for any mortal throat. It is the sound of chains rattling, of promises remembered. I know it for what it is without needing to be told. The dark gods have noticed. The light around the throne flares once more. Brighter than before, a corona that forces my eyes shut, though its brilliance still etches itself across my vision. I hear the grinding of the throne's mechanisms locking, unlocking, transforming. The Adeptus Mechanicus scream litanies of binding, but their words are meaningless now. The throne is no longer theirs. It never was. And then there is movement. True, undeniable movement. The Emperor begins to rise. Slowly, agonizingly, his skeletal form lifts from the throne, armor fused to flesh, haloed by arcs of lightning that scorch the marble beneath him. Sparks cascade like meteors. The custodians fall to their knees, not in ritual, but in surrender to gravity that is not gravity, to will that is not human. I cannot breathe. My chest is iron, my lungs stone. My quill slips from my fingers and shatters on the floor dot. The Emperor stands, and the galaxy holds its breath. Chapter 2. The fracture of faith. The moment the Emperor rose from the throne, faith itself broke. For 10 millennia, the Imperium has existed not upon his presence, but upon his silence. The Ecclesiarchy built its temples upon a corpse that did not contradict them. The Inquisition sharpened its blades in the shadow of a god who did not intervene. The High Lords reigned because the Emperor never spoke against them. Silence was the mortar that bound a galaxy of contradictions together. And now that silence has ended, on the steps of Terra, 1 billion pilgrims scream at once. Some cry out in rapture, tearing their robes and pressing their foreheads into stone until blood smears like paint across sacred ground. Others turn and run, abandoning relics, scattering votive candles like fireflies in their flight. To them the sight of the Emperor rising is not salvation, it is terror, because it proves every sermon they had heard was incomplete. every truth fragile as parchment before flame. The Ecclesiarchy collapses into war with itself before the hour is out. Cardinals scream liturgies that contradict one another. Each claiming the emperor's movement affirms their sect alone. Some declare he is risen as the god they always named him. Others insist he returns in mortal form, rebuking those who deified him. Still others call it heresy, a trick of demons, and begin burning their own flock to prevent corruption. Across Terra, shrines become fortresses, pulpits become battlements. Faith, once the strongest chain of unity in the Imperium, becomes its sharpest blade, cutting the body politic to ribbons dot in the chamber of the High Lords. Panic reigns. The Senatorum Imperialis has ruled in his name for 10,000 years, but their mandate was always predicated on his silence. Now, with him awake, every decree they pass becomes an echo. Some lords cry for abdication, others for defiance, still others beg the custodians for guidance and receive none. The Inquisition, divided as ever, turns their suspicion inward. Puritans proclaim this awakening the dawn of a new Imperium. Radicals whisper that the emperor's form is too warped, too broken, that perhaps it is not him at all. Bolters are drawn in sanctified halls. The most powerful men and women of humanity threaten to kill each other not for what has happened, but for what it means. Beyond Terra, the schism spreads faster than astropathic signals can contain it. On Armageddon, war-hardened guardsmen abandon their trenches to kneel, last guns clattering onto ash wastes as they pray toward a sky suddenly alive with unnatural light. On Macragge, ultramarines stand silent, waiting for word from Guilliman, who himself locks the doors of his stratagem and speaks to no one. On Cadia's ruins, the broken pylons blaze, as if answering the Astronomican's surge, and survivors swear that the planet itself whispers his name. Every fragment of the Imperium interprets the event through its own lens, and none can agree. Unity dissolves, and in its place blossoms a storm of fervor and doubt. For the common man, it is not theology but survival that shatters. Administratum clerks who live their lives copying endless script realize their records may already be false. Their emperor is no longer a corpse but a will, and if he speaks, everything they wrote, every decree, every tax, every conscription may be overturned with a word. Soldiers tremble, not at death but at the uncertainty of orders. For centuries they fought knowing their emperor demanded sacrifice. Now they do not know if he will still demand it or worse, if he never did, and their blood was spilled for men. Not for him. And in the warp the fracture widens. The Astronomican flares like a sun going nova, its brilliance refracting into countless interpretations. Psychers scream themselves to death, some chanting hymns of joy, others cursing their lives as lies. Demons howl with glee, not because the emperor rises, but because humanity itself is tearing apart over the meaning of it. The ruinous powers feed not only on fear and blood, but on contradiction, on hypocrisy, on the lies mortals tell themselves. The emperor's rise gives them a feast larger than any crusade in the palace. I stand amid the wreckage of the Archivum Vox. Ink lies scattered across the floor like spilled blood. Sarai weeps silently beside me, her quill still in hand, though her parchment is blank. I understand why. What words can be written when the lexicon of reality itself is being rewritten? Every mark feels profane, every sentence premature. Yet still I try. My hand shakes as I write the only truth that remains. Clear dot faith has fractured. The Emperor has risen, and nothing in the Imperium will survive the contradiction. The fracture does not remain confined to terra. It blossoms outward, born on every astropathic screen and every garbled vox pulse, until the very arteries of the Imperium throb with discord. Planets that once swore fealty and silence now demand answers. Shrine worlds erupt in civil war before the first day ends. On Ophelia the Seventh, the great bastion of the Ecclesiarchy, cardinal houses split like rotten fruit one side, claiming the Emperor has vindicated their millennia of worship, the other insisting his rising proves they blasphemed all along by calling him God. Cathedrals that once thundered with hymns now blaze with less fire, their stained glass shattering in sprays of color that catch fire before they touch the ground. On terra, the schism is rawest. The pilgrims outside the eternity gate turn their violence inward. Factions form within hours. Some prostrate themselves in absolute surrender. Others raise crude banners proclaiming a new crusade, and still more denounce what they saw as a demonic trick meant to lure mankind into ruin. Blood pools on the marble steps, soaks into ancient cracks, and is lapped up by desperate lips who claim it as holy. The adeptus arbites attempt to enforce order, but their sharp mauls are useless against mobs convinced. There, acting with the Emperor's blessing, the High Lords dissolve into paralysis. Their chamber fills with accusations, alliances forming and collapsing with every passing hour. One calls for disbanding the Ecclesiarchy entirely, declaring that the Emperor's movement is proof he never wanted worship. Another demands the immediate initiation of a galaxy-wide holy war, insisting the Emperor has risen as God incarnate. Blades are drawn, oaths broken, assassination attempts whispered. Only the presence of the custodians, silent, golden, immovable, prevents blood from staining the senatorum floor. Yet their silence is worse than words. For if even they wait without guidance, who can claim certainty? The Inquisition fares no better. Across its secret chambers, doctrines erupt into violence. Puritans of the Thorian Creed shout vindication. Had they not always said the Emperor could return? But monodominants denounce the very idea, insisting this rising must be heresy. Radicals whisper darker things still, that the being who moved may not be the Emperor, but something wearing his corpse as mask. Death follows every whispered doubt, but still the arguments spread faster than blades can silence. I record fragments as they pass through the archivum vox, though my hand grows numb with the weight of contradiction. A guardsman regiment on Armageddon kneeling mid-battle, executed by their commissar for cowardice. An entire convent of sisters of battle on Ophelia, burning themselves alive, convinced their worship had offended him. A Mechanicus-forged world declaring the Omnissiah proven false, only to detonate its reactors an hour later. Each report scratches across parchment like the groan of a breaking continent. Sarai murmurs beside me that perhaps this was always inevitable, that perhaps the Imperium required his silence to survive, that in awakening he has doomed us more surely than any Xeno's fleet or demonic incursion. I want to argue, but my mouth is dry. I want to tell her that his presence means hope, but the word feels brittle, like glass that would shatter if spoken. For in the warp, the fracture shines brighter than the Astronomican itself. Demons gather like carrion birds, savoring the contradictions bleeding from every human soul. The dark gods laugh, because they understand what mortals never could. Belief is strength, but divided belief is a banquet. And now humanity is feeding them by the billion. The Emperor stands. The Imperium falls. The fracture of faith spreads like wildfire through parchment halls and rusted spires alike. Entire hive cities erupt in riots, not because of famine or plague, but because sermons once thought uncheckable now crumble beneath new interpretations. In the hab blocks of Necromunda, preachers shout themselves hoarse from balconies, some swearing the Emperor's rise marks the end of sin, others that it heralds the end of mankind. Congregations that once knelt together now drag each other into the streets, branding heretic on neighbor's skin with the heated barrels of Lazarifals. The Astra Militarum feels the split in its bones. For generations, soldiers have fought with the certainty that their lives were coin freely spent in service to a silent emperor. Commissars enforced that silence with bolt and flame, their authority absolute. Now whispers pass down the line faster than orders. What if the emperor never wanted this? What if our sacrifice was wasted? Regiments fracture, discipline frays. Some companies refuse to fire, believing their emperor has returned to lead them in person. Others obey their commissars all the more fiercely, convinced rebellion is the true test of faith. Whole campaigns falter not because of enemy fire, but because soldiers no longer agree on what banner they fight beneath. The adepta sororitas burn with fervor, their faith too intense to cool, but their unity dies as swiftly as the rest. Some orders declare the emperor vindicated as God eternal, doubling their zeal to purge the doubtful. Others kneel in shame, convinced that worship itself was error, that they must atone by silence or self-immolation. On distant shrine worlds, sisters torch their own convents, chanting hymns as the flames consume them, while others rally behind zealot priests who promise to march at the emperor's side in a final crusade. Faith becomes pyre and blade both, turning sacred precincts into charnel houses, even among the Adeptus Astartes, whose loyalty is written into gene seed and battle hymn. Certainty fractures. Some chapters, long estranged from Terra, fall to their knees in stunned reverence, their Primarch's oaths suddenly secondary before the living hand of the master of mankind. Others grow suspicious, whispering that perhaps this is no resurrection, but a trap laid by the ruinous powers to sunder them from within. Guilliman's silence only deepens the rift. His refusal to proclaim truth leaves his sons adrift, each interpreting the emperor's movement according to their own scars. For warriors who once carved unity through war, the absence of shared faith is more dangerous than any enemy dot in the palace itself. The tension is a storm that does not break. The High Lords shout, but their words carry no weight. The custodians watch, but offer no counsel. The light of the throne seeps through marble cracks, casting every debate in gold so bright it makes the arguing faces look like masks of flame. I write every word I can capture, but the parchment quivers in my hand as though the script itself resists permanence. The truth shifts faster than ink can dry dot and in the warp. The fracture is not mere metaphor. I feel it in the Archivum Vox, every time an astropath screams and falls silent. Every time the Astronomican surges like a star on the verge of collapse. Demons claw at the rift between belief and doubt, feeding on humanity's division, their laughter echoing like a choir of broken glass. The warp storms intensify, not in chaos, but in pattern, as if mocking the very idea of order. Faith was once a shield. Now it is a wound. Sarai leans close, her whisper shaking. Perhaps this is the Emperor's will. Perhaps he rises not to save us, but to test us, to see what truth survives when faith is torn apart. Her words chill me more than demon laughter, for I fear she may be right. The Emperor stands silent, and in that silence mankind devours itself. The fracture deepens until it no longer feels like schism, but like plague. Faith spreads as infection, mutating faster than any decree can contain. I see it in the endless tide of transmissions that pour into the Archivum Vox, hymns rewritten, banners repainted, oaths reforged and broken again within the same day. The Imperium is no longer a single empire. It is 1,000 competing visions draped over the same star map. On Terra, the steppes have become a battlefield. Pilgrims carve holy sigils into their skin with shards of broken relics, believing the wounds themselves will prove loyalty. Others brandish stolen Arbites carbines, firing into the crowd, convinced they are purging heresy at its root. The marble runs slick with blood, yet the people do not disperse. They fight, they scream, they die, but they do not leave. The sight of the throne's light holds them as surely as gravity. The Adeptus Arbites are overwhelmed. Their shock mauls crack skulls like melons. Their suppression fire cuts swaths through the mob, but every corpse becomes relic, every drop of blood a sacrament. The Arbites know it. I see it in the fragments of Vox reports. Every kill makes them stronger, every strike a proof of prophecy. They withdraw behind barricades, cursing doctrine that never prepared them for war against faith itself. Beyond Terra, the spiral worsens. On shrine worlds, pilgrimages transform into crusades. Entire populations abandon their cities and factories, declaring themselves marching armies of the Emperor's rebirth. On forged worlds, skittery legions split as machine spirits themselves seem to rebel, some firing upon their handlers, others chanting litanies in binary as though joining a hymn none taught them. Even the void fleets fracture. Admirals debate whether to hold orbit in reverence or to retreat before. Terra tears itself apart. The Ecclesiarchy burns brightest and breaks hardest. Cardinals issue mutually exclusive decrees in the same hour, their voices competing like thunderclaps. Priests declare miracles in every shadow and contradiction in every miracle. I hear one proclamation that the Emperor has risen as a god to usher the galaxy into eternal war, followed immediately by another claiming his rise proves humanity must lay down arms and embrace peace. Both proclamations spark riots. Both are drenched in blood before the echo fades. The Inquisition moves swiftly, but even blades cannot cut this kind of contagion. Cells purge one another, whole conclaves vanish in fire, inquisitors duel in the cloisters of the palace itself. Heresy becomes indistinguishable from doctrine because every creed now has scripture to defend it. The sight of the Emperor risen, the weapon that once silenced dissent, his absence no longer exists. Now every heretic claims his presence as proof. In the warp, the fracture becomes storm. The Astronomican's beacon bends into shards, each fragment burning with different hue. Navigators steer by visions no two can agree upon. Some see a star burning steady, others a crown of fire, still others a sword dripping with blood that is also light. Entire fleets vanish into the warp, not consumed but diverged, each pulled toward a different truth. I stand in the archivum, quill trembling, parchment streaked with ink blots that look like constellations drowned in black seas. Sarai does not write any more. She only watches the reliquary door, her lips moving silently. I ask her what prayer she whispers, but she only shakes her head, as if words spoken aloud will shatter something fragile. The fracture of faith is no longer a wound. It is a chasm, and every voice of mankind, from the loftiest high lord to the lowest serf, is falling into it, screaming a different truth, and the Emperor says nothing. Chapter 3. The Shattering Imperium. The Imperium was never a single body, only a vast corpse sewn together by silence and fear. Now, with the Emperor's rising, that corpse begins to tear at its sutures. Faith has already fractured. Now power itself unravels. The high lords remain cloistered in the Senatorum Imperialis, but their authority seeps away with every heartbeat. Governors across Segmenta no longer heed their decrees, citing the Emperor's awakening as justification for independence. Some claim direct visions, swearing they alone are chosen to speak his will. Others simply seize the moment, ripping their worlds free from centuries of tithe and command. The administratum drowns in contradictions. Orders and counter-orders flood the Vox channels until no one can tell which seals are true. Entire sectors freeze as bureaucracy collapses. Star systems cut adrift not by rebellion but by confusion. The Astra Militarum fractures next. Regiments receive contradictory orders: march to Terra to defend the palace, or stay and suppress the chaos at home. Commissars execute soldiers for insubordination, only to be torn apart by mobs convinced the Emperor himself has pardoned their disobedience. Armored columns clash in Hive streets, guardsmen against guardsmen, both sides invoking the same Emperor. The Munitorum's supply lines falter, convoys stranded as commanders hoard munitions for whatever crusade they believe is at hand. The greatest army in the galaxy begins to devour itself. The Astartes are no bulwark. For centuries they have fought with the certainty of their gene oaths, their loyalty tied to Terra, to the throne, to the man who sat in silence. Now that silence has been broken, so too is their unity. Some chapters proclaim the Emperor risen as God, declaring immediate crusades across neighboring sectors. Others call for patience, for direct communion with Guilliman or Terra before acting, but their restraint looks like weakness to zealots. Brother fights brother, bolters thundering across void ships once sworn to the same cause. The angels of death turn their fury inward. The Adeptus Mechanicus, perhaps most shaken of all, fracture at their roots. For millennia they taught that the throne was machine, life support, and extension of the Omnissiah's truth. Now it repairs itself, reconfigures, answers to no priest or rite. Forge worlds split down to their cogitator cores. Some declare the Emperor proven the Omnissiah incarnate. Others denounce him as usurper of the machine god. Skittery legions exchange fire not with Xenos or heretics, but with one another, red robes burning against red robes. Binary war hymns clashing like opposing choirs. Mars itself trembles, its fabricator general locked in stasis between worship and doubt. Even the void is no refuge. The Navy's chain of command unravels as admirals interpret the Emperor's movement according to their own creed. Some hold position in orbit over Terra, guns bristling outward to repel imagined threats. Others flee to secure their home sectors, abandoning Terra to chaos. Dockyards burn as crews riot, declaring they will sail only for captains who share their faith. Fleets vanish into the void, carrying with them entire interpretations of truth. On Terra, the imperial palace itself begins to break apart under the strain. Pilgrims choke the streets, Arbites barricade sanctuaries, and the custodians stand silent at the throne's gates, offering no decree. The throne shines, steady now, but the silence of the risen emperor cuts deeper than words. Each faction interprets his stillness as affirmation of their own truth. Each finds certainty in contradiction. In the Archivum Vox, transmissions flood the air in a storm of paradox. A planet declares itself the chosen seat of the new Imperium, its governor crowning himself Emperor's voice. Another claims the Emperor has risen only to demand humanity lay down its arms, ordering immediate demilitarization. Still another calls for exterminatus on half its sector, convinced purgation is proof of loyalty. No truth can be sifted from the tide. The Vox is no longer archive, it is battlefield. I watch Sarai, her eyes hollow as she copies fragments, her hand mechanical, though her soul is breaking. It is coming apart, she whispers. Not faith this time. The Imperium itself, and she is right. The corpse sewn together by silence is unraveling into war. Power abhors a vacuum, and the Emperor's awakened silence is the most terrible vacuum of all. Decrees once carved in adamant are now parchment before a furnace. In hive after hive, governors declare curfews that no one honors, while manufactura stall as workers abandon assembly lines to join processions or militias or both in alternating hours, as if switching shifts between devotion and bloodshed. Tithe ships sit at anchor while Munitorum clerks argue whether shipments should be rerouted to Terra. To newly proclaimed crusades are withheld entirely until the Emperor speaks a single word to sanctify the ledger. On some worlds, the ledgers burn first. The Scali that forged orphans into officers began teaching 2 contradictory catechisms before lights out, and cadets memorize both with hollow eyes, knowing the wrong recital at the wrong parade could mean a bolt round through the skull. Planetary defense forces fracture along chapel lines. Vox towers blare prayers at dawn and firing solutions by noon, and the same voices read both with equal conviction. Command posts switch oaths like banners, their sigils flipped on the hour to match whichever patrol holds the stairwells. On the forge world of Light's Stata, where I once catalogued a decade of output ties, an entire macroclade of skittery refuses ignition at morning rites. Their machine spirits answer only to a new pattern, a cadence distilled from the throne's surge, and their handlers, terrified, call it treason in the language of diagnostics. Across the valley another cohort kneels and lays down arms, Benharic hymns, modulating into something like weeping. Tech priests duel atop gantries with arc mauls and logic, sparks falling like meteors into the night. The Vox brings us the aftermath, a city of cranes frozen in salute, foundries silent, titans asleep beneath their cradle arches while the sky glows with unspent heat. The Navy writes its own lament. In Segmentum Solar, 2 battle groups drift within visual range. Macro-cannon ports yawning, each side broadcasting sanctified ultimatums that differ only in punctuation. A frigate captain, young enough to still dream of medals instead of graves, orders his ship between them, vox open, reciting the oath of moment as if the words themselves could interlock gears that have sheared loose from history. For 3 minutes the void holds its breath. Then a single lance battery no admiral will later admit whose fires one clean line of light through his keel. The battle groups break formation like a flock startled by lightning and vanish into their own separate truths, leaving only a seam of frozen vapor and a grave unmarked by any chart. The Adeptus Astartes begin to choose. Some chapters translate toward Terra in silence, their serfs scrubbing decks while chaplains strip their chapels to bare stone as if simplicity could ward off doubt. Others anchor above their fortress monasteries and lock their gates, awaiting a word from Gilliman that does not come. There are ugly stories, too, arriving in jittering packets that stutter like guilty breath, boarding torpedoes, slamming into cousin hulls, oath brothers exchanging volleys across a cathedral of stars. Gene seed lost not to Zeno's chiton, but to familiar heraldry. Librarians on both sides claim visions, some of a hand lifted in blessing, others of a blade leveled in judgment. Neither vision brings restraint. On Terra, the Senatorum Imperialis issues 3 edicts in a single hour that cancel each other out like equations balanced on panic. By the 4th hour, their proclamations are unsigned. By the 5th, their seals are forged by rivals with hands as steady as surgeons. The Arbites abandon the fiction of persuasion and build bastions within the palace itself, turning cloisters into redoubts and sacristies into armories, while pilgrims outside carry planks from broken scaffolds as if they were lances blessed by proximity. The air tastes of incense, oil, and fear rendered down to something metallic that does not leave the tongue. Sarai, and I are ordered forward with a custodian escort to deliver an authenticated digest of the day's fractures to a conclave of lords who demand proof the world is ending, along the exact lines they prefer. The custodian says nothing as we walk, but his presence rearranges hallways, crowds peeling away as if gravity had pivoted around his stride. His ormite armor is scored with fine hairline cracks that drink the throne's light and give nothing back. When we pass under an arch of marble saints, the statue's eyes appear to follow him with expressions I cannot name. We cross the hall of Ling and enter the antechamber to the Senatorum, where voices batter the doors from within like waves battering a hull. A robed attendant with the look of a man already dead takes our slates with both hands and nearly drops them when the custodian merely inclines his helm. Through the seam of the door I glimpse a slice of the chamber, a lord militant with blood on his cuff, an ecclesiarch with ash on her brow, an inquisitor whose bolt pistol rests on the table like an extra argument. Someone shouts that the Astra Militarum must be recalled to Terra in total. Someone else laughs in a way that sounds like breaking teeth and asks who will feed the segmentum if every plowman is handed a laskin and a hymn. The custodian does not enter. He turns away and we turn with him, and the door closes on the arithmetic of a dying Parliament dot in the colonnade beyond. A procession of novitiates kneels as we pass, their lips bleeding from prayers bitten too hard. One looks up, barely more than a child, and meets my eyes as if pleading for the secret note that will make the music resolve. I want to tell him there is no resolution, only modulation into harsher keys. I want to hand him a single sentence that will let him sleep before his ordination, if ordination still exists tomorrow. Instead, I lower my gaze because I am a scribe, not a savior, and the words I keep are heavier than any I give away. Dot by night, Terra glows like a forge. The light from the sanctum no longer grows, but it does not fade, and in its unwavering blaze every shadow feels deliberate. The Custodes change their arrangements in ways no outsider can chart. Lines of gold reweaving into patterns that speak a language of geometry and oath. Somewhere within that lattice a decision is made or avoided. I cannot tell which is more terrible. When our escort leaves us at the Archivum, he pauses, and for the first time since the stirring, I hear a custodian voice. It is low and even, like a bell heard from deep water. "Record, truly," he says, and departs, leaving the command dangling between duty and threat. We do as commanded. The night is a parade of contradictions. A governor petitions permission to proclaim himself regent on the strength of a dream in which a hand brushed his hair. A cardinal begs authorization to dissolve his own diocese for fear it blasphemed by existing. A Navy telemaster confesses to rerouting an entire sector's Prometheum to Terra without orders because the light demanded it, and signs his name beneath the confession with a flourish that looks like joy. I write until my knuckles throb and my vision doubles, until ink tastes like iron at tea. Custodian priority overrides. Deployment grids. Gate seals. Palace corridors designated by names that exist only on maps. I will never be allowed to read. The geometry of gold is moving. Outside, the mobs chant conflicting litanies that no longer clash so much as braid into a rope fit for strangling nations. Inside, the gears begin to catch again, not in harmony, but in grim intent. The corpse is not mended. It is arming itself. Somewhere beyond stone and ritual, the Emperor remains standing, silent as a verdict. And in that silence a new sound gathers, distant as thunder above an empty sea, the footfall of something disciplined approaching the edge of a precipice. It intends to cross. The machinery of the Imperium groans, as if every cog has slipped its axle. The fractures no longer resemble lines of thought or sects of belief. They are becoming open wounds in governance itself. The Senatorum is paralyzed, its decrees drowned in contradictory proclamations. Vox traffic stutters with overlapping commands. One lord militant ordering crusade fleets to Terra, another forbidding movement under penalty of treason. The result is paralysis in some sectors and wildfire in others. Civil wars ignite, not between human and Xenos, but between banners that all bear the Aquila. On the shrine world of Deimos, Astra Militarum regiments bombard each other across canyon lines, each commander swearing to the same emperor, while damning the other as heretic. On Perseus' reach, Astartes of two allied chapters come to blows, their heraldry indistinguishable in the void. Bolters tearing apart brothers over whether worship itself is defiance. The Mechanicus falls deepest into the abyss. Forge worlds answer to no one but their own visions of the Omnissiah, and those visions splinter with every flare of the throne. Some raise their voice in binary hymns proclaiming the Emperor proven as machine, God incarnate, and set about rewriting every liturgy of Mars. Others scream of blasphemy, that the throne's awakening is a challenge to their faith. Skittery clash in ordered lines across gantries of iron and fire, their volleys precise, their obedience flawless, but their loyalty divided. Titans are called to stride, not against alien foes, but against one another. Even Mars itself trembles. Reports leak through static and blood that the Fabricator General has sealed the great forges, neither blessing nor condemning the throne. His silence is heavy as the Emperor's own. Skittery legions lock an endless drill across red deserts, waiting for a command that does not come, while priests war with litanies, their mechadendrites slick with each other's oil dot in the warp. The shattering is felt more keenly than in marble halls or steel decks. The Astronomican flickers like a star refracted through broken glass, each shard pointing to a different truth. Navigators scream, their third eyes bleeding, as they glimpse 1,000 futures blooming at once. Fleets vanish into those futures, guided not by charts but by interpretations. The warp feeds on the contradiction, its storms thickening, its demons laughing like choirs drunk on humanity's confusion. I scratch these words onto vellum that quivers under my hand. Sarai sits beside me, her lips cracked from prayer, her eyes rimmed red from sleeplessness. "This is not fracture," she whispers. "It is collapse." I want to deny her, but outside the archivum I hear the sound of hymns and fire intermingling, and I know she is right. The Imperium was always a fortress built on sand, mortared by fear, kept upright by silence. The Emperor has risen, and the fortress is falling, stone by stone. The collapse spreads like fire through dry scrub, uncontainable and hungry. Terra itself becomes a mirror of the wider Imperium, every faction, every creed, every contradiction pressed shoulder to shoulder until sparks ignite in the crush. The steps outside the Eternity Gate, once a place of pilgrimage, transform into trenches. Pilgrims wield broken shrine icons as blades. Arbites barricade themselves behind voxcasters now silent, and sisters of battle patrol with bolters ready, torn between protecting the faithful and purging them. The air smells of incense, promethium, and burning flesh, each indistinguishable from the other. Within the palace, authority curdles into desperation. The High Lords shout until their throats bleed, but their words are drowned beneath the steady glow of the throne. Their edicts scatter through the vox, each contradicting the last, until commanders no longer know which seal carries legitimacy. Some obey none at all, turning instead to visions, omens, or sheer ambition. I hear reports of sector governors proclaiming themselves hand of the Emperor, entire planets swearing to them. Armies raised under banners painted only hours before. The Astra Militarum becomes a beast with its spine broken. Commissars execute squads for disobedience, only to be torn apart by regiments unwilling to kneel before anyone but the throne. On Mordian, a single order fractures an entire world, half the Iron Guard holding their parade lines, the other half breaking formation to kneel in prayer. They open fire on each other across the drill fields where generations once learned unity. The shots echo into the void, carried on vox recordings that spread like contagion. Other regiments hear them and follow suit. The Astartes, meant to be angels of unity, descend into nightmare. Brothers who fought together for centuries now cross blades in boarding actions, their oaths pulling them in opposite directions. Some sail for Terra at once, armor repainted in haste, chanting battle hymns as if marching to their Primarch's side. Others lock themselves within their fortress monasteries, declaring every movement blasphemy until the Emperor himself speaks. Their silence is no less damning than open fire. It tells their serfs, their allies, their kin, no one agrees what he has become, and the Mechanicus, Mars itself, whispers. I read fragments smuggled through astropathic haze, a forged cathedral where the reactors pulsed in harmony with the throne, a skittery cohort that turned its weapons inward when its priest dared to call the Emperor man, a titan whose plasma heart ignited unbidden, standing without crew, its vox bellowing a hymn in binary none alive had ever coded. Forge after forge descends into ritual war, the red planet burning brighter in the night sky of Terra, a star of division where once there was constancy. The warp thickens with storm. The Astronomican no longer shines as one beacon, but as 1,000 shards, each seen differently by each navigator. Fleets vanish into those contradictions, not consumed, but diverge drawn down paths that may never converge again. Demons swarm at the edges, not in organized invasion, but in gleeful hunger, feeding on the paradox of a species that cannot agree on the meaning of its god. Dip my quill into ink that tastes like metal on my tongue. My hand shakes as I write, because I know these words may be the last record before the archivum itself fractures. Sarai has stopped writing entirely. She stares at the reliquary door, lips parted, as if waiting for the banner within to rise again. I ask her what she sees. She only shakes her head, whispering, everything, nothing. The Imperium shatters, not with a single blow, but with the endless weight of its own contradictions. And through it all, the Emperor remains standing, silent as stone, radiant as fire, unmoved by the ruin gathering in his name. The shattering bleeds into every corridor of the palace, into every gutter of Terra, into every vessel that still bears the imperial aquila. The Imperium is no longer a single empire. It is 1,000 splintering reflections, each convinced it alone holds the Emperor's true image. I walk the upper galleries of the archivum with Sarai, summoned by a custodian whose name we are not permitted to know. From that height we see the city stretching beyond the palace walls, oceans of lights flickering in patterns that no longer resemble order. Whole districts have gone dark, their power siphoned to fuel barricades or redirected into shrines. Others blaze with fire, pyres consuming the bodies of heretics or martyrs, depending on which sermon one chooses to hear. The smoke rises like incense, carried by winds that whisper prayers in accents not taught by any catechism. Reports stream in, too many to catalog, but I scratch fragments all the same. On Armageddon, guardsmen kneel in the ash wastes, last guns discarded, their officers shot for ordering advance. Orc war bands surge in response, their laughter carried on the wind, yet the soldiers do not lift their weapons. They chant, waiting for a sign. On Baal, blood angels fall into visions of their primarch, each brother claiming to see Sanguinius standing beside the throne. They argue blade to blade over whether those visions demand patience or immediate crusade. On Mars, the forge hives quake with detonations, titans striding against titans while tech priests debate the true name of the Omnissiah. The Navy bleeds itself across the void. Admirals demand fealty to interpretations their crews no longer share. Whole flotillas vanish, some declaring themselves crusade fleets bound for Terra, others swearing to defend their home sectors until the Emperor speaks. The warp swallows them eagerly, each shard of the Astronomican tugging them down a different path. Each demon laughing as faith guides mortals to ruin faster than any blade dot in the Senatorum. The high lords shout over one another until words are knives. I glimpse their chamber once more, through a crack in the door, as our custodian escort delivers another slate. One Lord Militant demands that Guilliman be summoned immediately, that only a son of the Emperor can mediate the truth. Another snarls that Guilliman's silence proves his betrayal. A cardinal rises, robes spattered with blood from assassins' blades already turned aside, and